Hi, folks. Rob Goller here. Thanks for joining me again this week for our weekly history chats. I appreciate the support of this project. Each week, I'm getting more and more people asking questions and giving me suggestions. With that being said, I'm going to get to the suggestions that have come along. I'm trying to get through the winter ones, the winter suggestions before it becomes untimely. We like timely topics, right? So this week, actually, speaking of the weather, I've been getting asked a lot about. We're talking about the weather a lot, so we're talking about winter with the lot of snow we got. I talked about snow days last week. Then we had the January thaw. So a lot of people are talking about how we handled the thaw in the past and ice in the creeks. And I'll get to that. There's some really fascinating stories about how we used to handle the ice in Tannery Brook and in the creeks around us. But today, I want to talk about the sidewalk plow here in the village. I've gotten actually quite a few questions about um, the not the sidewalk plow that we have today. We have this motorized. Today we just call it the sidewalk plow, but back in the day, you would differentiate between the motorized sidewalk plow and what we used to have was a horse-drawn sidewalk plow here in the village of East Aurora. And a lot of people remember the the sidewalk plow, the horse-drawn sidewalk plow. And actually, one of my friends and good friends, that posted on social media that it was quite the sight as a young person to see, having come from the city, to see a plow being pulled by a horse. They didn't see that necessarily in the cities, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, but a lot of people are remembering the sidewalk plow. Some folks are remembering it into the 1970s and 1980s, and our memories aren't so good. It probably didn't go that that far into the 70s or 80s. And what I did a couple years ago, actually, 2017, I think, when I was doing research, and I'm compiling a lot of things for an upcoming book project. And it's funny how many times I've written about the weather, and so this was one of them. And I wanted to get down to the facts related to this horse-drawn sidewalk plow. We might be familiar with this. Actually, I actually put it in my one book, Legendary Locals, and actually he's right on the back. But Mr. Arthur Dorscheid was featured in this book. This is the image that a lot of us remember, or if we weren't around, we're not old enough. Um, that we refer to, and Mr. Dorscheid, gets a lot of credit for it. And he actually, I'll talk about him more in a bit as individually, but he's the image we see. However, there was a whole team of people. He wasn't the only one. The village actually hired quite a few people to plow the sidewalks. And so what I did is I dug through the newspaper archives, and a great resource, doesn't matter which community you live in, is your town board or your village board minutes. Your town or village clerk would have those. A lot of communities have put them on their websites. Here in the village of East Aurora, we have the village board minutes going back to the early 1900s right on the website. So I did a little search, and I did a search for sidewalk plow and variations of that. And the first mention I can find of the sidewalk plow was February 18th of 1929. Um, and the village, what's great about those village board meeting minutes is at the end they would pay all the bills, and they actually listed. They still have a list of bills, a list of receipts, a list of bills to be paid, um, accounts payable. They would list them all in the minutes. And so those searchable minutes I found on February 18th, 1929, is the first time I can find that where someone was specifically paid to plow the sidewalks, and it was $82 to a Henry George. And so we know at that point they were plowing the sidewalks with horse-drawn plows. They were probably Village crews were probably clearing some sidewalks before that, but that's where I was able to find out that for almost 100 years we've been, at the very least, plowing our sidewalks. So throughout the 30s, I kept looking through each set of minutes just to see if anything interesting popped up. And they they weren't hiring the local. They didn't have a DPW doing it like we do today. They would hire out owners of local liveries. So like R.A. Nye, Mr. Nye, he owned a local livery. A couple other names: William Becker, Michael Burns. People who had liveries or accessibility to horses. Now, this was a period of time where 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, we were transitioning into cars. So these folks had the horses, and in the winter months, they would be making extra money by clearing the sidewalks. So this is how it went for many years. And actually, at that point, I was able to find they were mentioning that there were 41 miles of sidewalks in the village of East Aurora back then in the 30s. Um, and so they not one person couldn't do it all. And today you see how fast that sidewalk plow goes. um, Imagine the horse could go pretty quickly, but not as fast as the plow does today. And it would have taken a little bit more time. So they actually had a team of 5 or 6 people, men who would go out there with their horses, hitch up the team to the plow, and that's how they cleared the sidewalks. This went fine, as far as I could tell through all the newspapers and the village board minutes that I checked, until World War II. And that was a problem because the resources were lacking during the war, and the and men to run the horses was lacking. Of course, we had people, young men serving, and rationing and all sorts of things. The world was different, and the village struggled quite a bit to find enough teams of horses to clear the sidewalks. So when you look at that picture of Mr. Dorscheid going around the village, you think he's the only one. There's one horse and plow going around, but there were more than just one. So they were struggling. The village was struggling to find enough people to do it. So the 1940s, actually the winter of 1942-43, the height of World War II, and it wasn't just the horses that the horse plowing the sidewalks that was an issue. We had issues finding enough employees. Women were going into the workforce. I've written about that here locally in East Aurora. They just struggled to get the manpower and horsepower in order to clear the sidewalks. And so the village was quite adamant that from the beginning that this is a courtesy, that actually the village code still today says that the village sidewalks are the responsibility of the property owner, and that the plow itself is that comes through is just a courtesy to help you meet your requirements as a property owner of the village ordinance. And that was the case back then too. So you see this happening in the village board minutes and in the village in the East Aurora Advertiser, where the village they're talking about paying and trying to get enough people, enough horse teams together in order to clear the sidewalks, but they kept repeating um, that ultimately it is up to the responsibility of the property owner, and you see that happening over and over again. So that's not a new phenomena. That was part of the village ordinances even back then. So during World War II, the village had actually thought about switching over to motorized plows for the sidewalks. They had done that for the streets, but they were contemplating for the sidewalks. And by this point, in the old days, you would sleigh, um, uh, uh, horse-drawn sleighs to get places or walk in the streets. But starting in the 1910s and 1920s, a lot, especially the 1920s, so about 100 years ago, a lot more streets were getting sidewalks. They were putting sidewalk ins throughout the village. And so people wanted them clear. And the village board actually heard of a lot of complaints from residents during World War II. You think about that, everybody might nostalgia, romanticizing the past. We think the people from who were living during World War II might be like, oh, clearing the sidewalks, the least of our worries. We're not going to complain about that. We have a war going on. That's not true. They were complaining. They came to the village board meetings. They complained about the lack of the sidewalks being plowed, even though it really was their responsibility. So the village was kind of stuck. They didn't have enough people enough horses and men with horses to clear the sidewalks. They wanted to transfer to a motorized plow. The problem is they were trying to they had thought about putting a simple plow on the front of a tractor, but the tractor was too big. They just couldn't get the right equipment. And of course, during World War II, it was very difficult to get new vehicles and new plows and new equipment. So they couldn't just go out and buy a sidewalk plow. Um, New automobiles, new refrigerators, steel production. It was just all rationed, and it was going toward the war effort. So it really impacted this. So the village was sort of stuck. Couldn't get horses, and they couldn't buy the equipment for the plows. So in the they made it through uh, the war. They actually hired people to do it. They found people. They put the call out. Not as many snow plowers as they wanted. But in mid-January of 1943, they found at least 5 men who were taking turns, um, and they were recruited and they were able to do it. In the early 1950s, that's where Arthur Dorscheid comes in, the picture that we see often, and he became familiar throughout the village. He was hired, and you see in the village board minutes that he is paid every board meeting, or at least once a month, for the service of plowing the village's sidewalks. Um, he did it until just before he passed away, and he actually had a quite a tragic death. He died after he got hit by a car on Main Street, I think on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. His wife passed away the next day uh, uh, from the stress of it. So he passes away. So he was the one that did it, and so other village employees were stepping up to drive the horse-drawn plows into the 1950s. But as we got into the 50s, they were realizing, and you can sense this from the Easter Advertiser reports and the village board meeting minutes, that it just wasn't the most efficient way to do it. And so by 1960, um, uh, people were complaining that the job of the horses weren't just, they weren't getting to all the sidewalks, they couldn't get to all the sidewalks, and the horses weren't doing an efficient job. So the village board finally heard enough in 1960. And the village engineer actually told the village board, I just don't have the equipment to do this. Um, and so he said that they attempted to, again, put regular tractors with plow blades on them, but they were too big, and they dug up everybody's lawn, so people complained about that. And so he was sort of between a rock and a hard place. You either don't plow the sidewalks and people get mad, or you plow their sidewalks and it digs up their grass, and they get mad. And according to the reports in the Advertiser, it wasn't just like what we see in the spring when we're fixing up things. They really were digging up grass and things, and it was really troublesome to the people who lived here. And there was a big debate over whether we should even have a sidewalk plow, whether it was doing more harm than good. So they tried this tractor thing and decided that didn't work out. So finally, in 1963, the village board voted to spend $7,300 in 1973 money to purchase 2 motorized plows specifically designed for sidewalks. So they gave up on the horses and they gave up on the tractors with the blades on them. Um, and as they say, the rest is history. And they actually debated after the motorized plows came through. The village on a couple occasions has debated whether or not to get rid of the ordinance making sidewalk plowing the responsibility of the property owner. Actually, in 1966, I found one instance where they were trying to repeal the ordinance because they said, a couple of the village trustees said that in effect, the village had taken the responsibility of plowing the sidewalks and should continue to do it. And why have this, you either are, the village is going to plow them, or the village is not, and or it's going to be up to the homeowner's responsibility. But the village has still kept that on there, that the village plow is a courtesy, but ultimately we're responsible for, as village residents, to clear the sidewalks in front of our houses, and it stays the same. And actually, in November of 2011, the village board adopted a policy statement that indicated that removal of the snow from the village's, at that point, 54 miles of sidewalks, that's a lot of sidewalk, is a collaborative effort between the village and its residents. So they had to come out with a statement about it to clear up any misconception about the plow. So it has been that way since the beginning, where the village has plowed the sidewalks, and it's become an expectation, and it even became it was an expectation back in World War II, when the plows weren't going out and the residents were complaining. So yes, to answer the question simply, we did have horse-drawn plows. Although Mr. Dorscheid gets most of the attention because of the photographs of him that have been published and shared on social media, there was actually quite a few of them out there, of horse teams clearing sidewalks with plows throughout the history. And the earliest I could find was 1923, and then it continued into around 1960. So that's the horse-drawn sidewalk plows. And today, of course, we have the motorized sidewalk plows, but today everything's motorized, so we just call it a sidewalk plow. Thank you so much for joining me. Happy winter, and thanks for bringing these topics, ideas to me. Next week we'll talk about another winter topic while we still have winter here. Interesting note about winter, you'll see on some of the social media pages, the Town Historians page, we have Groundhog Day coming up here on February 2nd, and South Wales had its own groundhog for a while, and so I'll post on about that. There was a newspaper correspondent back in the days where you had a correspondent send in the news, who kept track each year of the what the groundhog did in South Wales. So we didn't have to look down to Pennsylvania, Puxatawney Phil, to see what was going to happen. We had our own here in South Wales, and he would put it in his column after it happened, and he actually they kept a diary of all the groundhog sightings, and unfortunately, more often than not, quite a bit more often than not, the groundhog saw its shadow, and we had allegedly 6 more weeks of winter, and according to this correspondent's diary. So that's the importance of diaries as well. They kept a diary, and they would go back and check the diary and actually came up with statistics on the groundhog. Whether or not there's scientific basis to the groundhog's prediction, that's up in the air. But to know that what the groundhog was saying, and of course that's no surprise here in Western New York that we have longer winters than other places, and that more often than not that we have longer winters. So just a neat other thing that I came across about the weather this week. So thanks again for all your great topic ideas. We'll talk again next week about more winter, spring weather as we take this turn into February. And again, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to send me a private message or put it in the comments. Again, I'm Rob Goller. I'm the town historian, village historian, but these videos and research that I'm doing are not part of my official duties as town and village historian, just my little disclaimer. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for supporting this project. And again, you can watch these videos anytime. If you like what you're seeing, please share. Please follow the page, and they're also available on YouTube, the YouTube channel as well. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.